Hi, everyone. Welcome so much for joining us for cruising the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway with Navionics and Waterway Guide. I am Jessica Grimm, a marine specialist with Navionics, a Garmin company. I'm joined today by Ed and Bob, two of my good friends that have been in the boating industry for decades. Ed is the editor-in-chief at Waterway Guide, and Bob also works with Waterway Guide and is better known as Bob423 and is an author as well. Both of them bring a ton of experience and knowledge to this webinar. So excited to have you guys. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Appreciate you having us on board from Waterway Guide. We're great partners and great allies with Navionics and Garmin, and it's always good to be here. And between Bob and me, you're right, we do have decades. You make us sound so old.
we have even more decades with me counted.
Well, there you have it. Hey, Bob, are you able to hear us on the far side?
Oh, yeah, I hear you fine.
Yeah. Great. Well, good to have you aboard. Thanks, Jessica. Do we need to take care of any business before we get started, or do you want to go ahead and get into the agenda and move it along?
I think we can go ahead and get into the agenda.
All right, sounds good. Well, we're going to keep this as short as we can. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and thanks again to Navionics and Garmin and Bob and the whole team for working on this. This is an extraordinary time on the Intracoastal Waterway, actually for boating across the United States and all of America's waters, in addition to worldwide. But we thought we would focus this particular webinar on what are the conditions along the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway. So we put together a quick agenda. If you're a first-timer and you want to start doing something on the waterway, I think you're going to find this to be a great piece of advice for the next few minutes between Bob and what Waterway Guide has compiled and what Navionics and Garmin does to make boating safe. I think you'll see some of that in this presentation. In addition, if you've been doing it for 15 years, like a lot of us, there's some other details specific to what's been going on the last couple of months that you may find interesting here. So we're going to talk about prepping and provisioning and great destinations and anchorages, favorite stops, and navigation tips and advice along the way. Before we get started, if no one has ever heard of the ICW, or even if you have, bear in mind that it's not just the Atlantic coast. It goes all the way over to Brownsville, Texas, in terms of what the federal government calls the Intracoastal Waterway. 3,000 miles. The Atlantic version goes from really Norfolk, which is mile 0, down to Key West. There's a northern section along the northeast coast as well. And then you have the Gulf Intracoastal Waterway. And notice the different designations, AICW, GIWW. It has to do with what federal agency or who's defining it, but it's all the same thing. It is intracoastal waterway, which means inside. It runs across the entire coast, and there's lots of inlets that allow you to get in and out. How long is it? Well, just from Norfolk to Key West is 1,243 miles, 1,080 nautical miles, and it's just chock full of bays and inlets and rivers and quiet anchorages and coves. The last stretch of it was finished in 1928, and it was designed to be 12 feet in depth initially for both commercial traffic, primarily commercial traffic, but it's not always 12 feet anymore, and that is one of the reasons why Bob Sherer and what he's done, his work over the last 10 years or so to help define those areas, and what Navionics, Garmin, and other hydrographers and cartographers are doing on a regular basis to keep us informed about the shallower areas, because it is evident in some places, but dredging is ongoing. If you've ever wondered really who uses the Intracoastal Waterway, it is a multi-use waterway, and it is one of America's finest resources. Everything from wildlife, commercial traffic, weekenders. Anytime you're on the Intracoastal Waterway, you're going to see probably one of these vessels plying the waters of the waterway. So it's an important intracoastal waterway, highway for lack of a better term, and it's important to thousands of communities up and down the coast, as well as the Gulf Coast as well. Many communities depend on their marinas and the facilities that are at their locations and municipalities to pay payrolls, inject money into the economy, and to keep the quality of life at a really high level along the waterway. Well, if you get ready to go cruising, what do you need? Well, I'm going to turn it over to Bob. Bob's got some great advice. He's been cruising for a long time. So, Bob, if I were going to start out on the waterway for my first trip or my 20th trip, what should I have in my bag of tricks?
Well, for one thing, I recommend getting a cruising guide that has just that type of information. You certainly have to be prepared to leave your house for a very long time. And doing that is also valuable for keeping your home port in good shape. You should choose several mobile navigation apps. Navionics obviously comes to mind, perhaps another one along the lines of Aquamap, and use those for navigating through the shallow areas. Learn the rules of the road. Slow down when overtaking another vessel, and also when vessels overtake you, they should slow down. And download the navigation app and pay attention to those waterway guide ICW manuals. Both are very valuable.
I think rules of the road's an important component for not only the Intracoastal Waterway, but anywhere on America's waters or anywhere worldwide, is understand what vessels are doing, what they're supposed to do, what your responsibility is, and recognize that there is always no perfect answer. Just because you have the right of way does not absolve you of a responsibility to navigate and maintain your vessel in a proper configuration to prevent collisions or to prevent other problems. So learn those rules of the road. Very important. Here's the Navionics boating app. I've been using Navionics as a boating app for years and have just always loved the cartography, the functionality. It's a superb piece of technology. They're always improving it, always doing something great with it. And I'm always amazed at just how much information and how much capacity that particular app has. So it's fairly inexpensive. In addition to any electronic nautical charts that you may have, it's very important for you to get an app, to have it on a mobile device so that you've got backup and you have multiple resources. Preparation for cruising. So, Bob, when you get ready to leave, you know what your vessel draws. Here are some of the details for cruising the Intracoastal Waterway. How about filling us in on some of these details, if you would?
Yeah, well, one thing to keep in mind, that 95% of the ICW, you can get through with a 6.5-foot keel. It's not a big deal. You just have to pay attention to those few areas that are shallow. And you can certainly find out where those areas are just in the Waterway Guide book, and also alerts along the way. Mast height is another item that can cause your problem. If you have 65 feet, not all bridges are 65 feet. And some of those are very well known and vary by the amount of water that's in the area at any particular point in time. Onshore winds will make the water level higher, and that mast clearance less. You should be aware of those things.
Good point. And we talk about wind and water on those stretches of wind and its effect on the water depth in some of the resources that we've presented in years past. If you're going out on the Intracoastal Waterway, what does it cost? Bob has been doing it for years. He's got 20 trips under his belt, which is amazing to me. That's 10 round trips, I think you mentioned before we got on. And if I were going to take off on a long ICW cruise today, what should I expect in terms of costs? What's it going to cost me to go do it for 2 or 3 months, Bob?
Well, it depends how much you want to be in the marina and how much you want to be on the, on the hook. As far as marinas are concerned, I mean, figure on the average $2 a foot, maybe $2.25. Some real expensive ones could be $3, but on the average, say about $2 a foot. And figure how often you want to be in a marina. Rule of thumb could be half the time. If you really like to anchor out, you can be in a marina only once a week. If you like the convenience of being in a marina, it can be 5 or 6 or 7 days a week. And you can compute your own costs based upon how long it's going to take you to get down there. You can figure on, for a sailboat, maybe 30 to 40 miles a day. On a power boat, you can do 50, 60 miles a day. All depends what you want to do. I would advise taking it slow, enjoy the sights. There's no reason to go down and treat it like you're driving a car. Take your time. As far as repairs are concerned, you need a kitty. Personally, I have about a $5,000 kitty, and I generally use it up. Things happen on a sailboat. Things happen on any boat. Be prepared for that. And there are places along the ICW to get repairs on a moment's notice. That's different from being an ICW as opposed to being, offshore or in a foreign country. Repairs are easy to get to. And car rental, food provisions are things that depend upon what's happening with the virus. We'll talk about food provisioning later on.
All right, that brings us to the next topic, provisioning during pandemic. This is one of the reasons why we wanted to hold this webinar at this time of year, is some rules changed dramatically the past 90 to 120 days. Bob lived through it. He was in Key West in early 2020 when Monroe County, Florida started changing the rules on what vessels could do, where they could go, if they had to leave, et cetera. And he began his trek during the midst of the pandemic. And here we are in the middle of 2020, really August of 2020, and into September, and things have changed a little bit. But how did you and Ann respond to that? How did you get around provisioning? Because it changed the rules on you.
Oh, yes. We were right in the middle of Key West, and they shut it down. They put down roadblocks. Nobody could come in. Nobody could leave. No marina was accepting any transients. So we hunkered down and just sat at Key West for about 2.5 months, 2.5 months longer than what we wanted to. Provisioning was really not a problem. We used the shopping convenience, Ship It in the case of Winn-Dixie, Instacart from Public, and we would lie in bed in the morning and order our groceries, and by 9 o'clock they would appear on the bow of the boat. It was great. And the other thing was we even had a laundry done remotely down at Key West. On the way back, we had places along the Key West, along the route back, where we could get groceries at every place we stopped. There was never a problem getting groceries. And you see the list there of all the places we went through. They all had services. You would just put in your zip code and up would pop all the places that had groceries delivered to the boat. We were in Myrtle Beach, 7:30 in the morning, we were lying in bed. Let's order groceries. And by 9 o'clock, they were right there in the parking lot. Very convenient.
Got to change the rules for provisioning overall. Let's hope that service continues. It's not bad at all. That's good news. So it really became fairly easy for you to deal with the pandemic conditions as you moved north on the Intracoastal Waterway this year in many ways. Let's talk a little bit about destinations and marinas and what you found there along the way. Obviously, we know that marinas, towns, anchorages, attractions, events, et cetera, the normal things that you do during boating have changed a little bit. What's your experience for each of these, Bob?
Well, what happened in the very beginning, some marinas wouldn't let you leave the marina. That gradually was eased as the pandemic progressed and started to subside somewhat. And the usual restriction was everybody, of course, had to wear a mask. And some marinas, you were restricted from leaving the marina. Most of them, by the time we went on ICW northward in April, or May rather, you could get out and walk around. But again, you had to be very careful about wearing a mask. And the people who serviced you, caught the lines, also wore masks. And when you went to put on fuel, for example, they would lay the nozzle down on the ground or on the dock. You could go over, pick up off the dock, and do your own refueling. And then lay it back on the dock and went to the dock house to pay, which was always going to be a window. You never went inside. So they practiced social distancing fairly well. And it was really not a problem.
Okay, well, I noticed that anchorages certainly are always an option on the Intracoastal Waterway. Did you have any problem finding decent anchorage or having any problem with access to shore once you anchored as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, there was one problem. When we first started out, some of the towns had their boat ramps closed. And us being in an anchorage, wanted to bring our dog ashore, and we used boat ramps for that purpose. So initially, we had to bypass some of the anchorages we might use in a city location because there was no way to get ashore, specifically Lantana. As we went further north, that restriction was eased. We had no further trouble once we got north of Florida.
Gotcha. Well, obviously, we don't know how this is going to play out in the weeks and months ahead. It certainly has changed boating in some circumstances. We know now that many of the attractions that we would want to go to on a trip on the Intracoastal Waterway or along the coast, regardless of where you are on hold. There are ample restrictions at those attractions, and many of the events that we've often liked to go to, whether you're going to make sure that you show up at a particular town for a wine festival or a big barbecue cookout or something like that, has started to change, and they're virtually non-existent at this time. But we're anticipating change in that department at some point, I guess, in the future.
And I
some of the
actually
favorite
have a
towns.
note, Ed. I'm actually from Lantana, and I just moved out of that town, and I do know that a lot of those things that were closed are reopened with proper social distancing and masks. So yeah, definitely lots of changes going on.
Yeah, and it's a good idea to be, we talked about preparation earlier. If you're headed somewhere, call ahead, find out what the rules are, because it is a moving target and has been a moving target for the past 6 or 8 months. As you know, Jessica, we were talking back at Christmas time and back in the springtime about what was going on in Florida and how it was impacting boating. So you're right, keep an eye on it. We do know that communities in various are in various states of accessibility. They're managing the pandemic differently, so remain flexible. Some of the favorite towns along the ICW, these are Bob's favorite towns and mine as well. I've been in every single one of these, and they're delightful for their own way. So if you're planning, we have found that most of these towns are open. They are allowing guests and visitors. Did you find any problems here at all, Bob?
No, the major problem, apart from what we usually experience, was the fact that nobody wanted you to use their loaner vehicle. That was really about the only difference. You could walk around the marina, you get off the marina, walk the dog. But during the pandemic, I don't know, maybe it's changed by now, you couldn't actually use the loaner vehicle to go shopping, which is why we use the grocery service to get supplies right to the boat.
Right. Well, fewer and fewer marinas are offering that loaner car service anyhow over the years, so it's something not to necessarily be dependent upon. So good advice there. I don't want to leave out the Gulf Intracoastal Waterway when we talk about America's Intracoastal Waterway. This is one of my favorite stretches of coastline, and some others who have cruised there. Apalachicola, Panama City took a beating a year or so ago, and they're still rebuilding the Pensacola and Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, and Slidell, Louisiana. Our friends there, Madisonville, Kemus. I was just in South Padre Island, Texas, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Delightful remote locations that are great for cruising. And then if you're doing Tarpon Springs to Fort Myers, there's some great West Coast locations as well. So when we talk Intracoastal Waterway, let's not leave out the Gulf side. That's an important part of cruising in America. And if you're looking for marinas, we're going to show you now, there's a couple of ways to locate them. Of course, marinas are listed in the Navionics app. They're there. You will see the symbols on the map. You touch the symbol. You hit the question mark. It gives you the listing, the information. There are plenty of other resources out there. Because I'm Waterway Guide, I'm going to present 2 that I think are pretty good. One is the Waterway Guide Marinas app. Free download. 8,000 marinas are listed in it. 35 data points. Telephone number to call out. You can sort by preferences for what you want at a marina. Featured marinas. It shows a map. It's pretty cool, simple app. Then we also have the Waterway Guide Explorer at waterwayguide.com, which is a web-based application. You touch any of those symbols, they open up, and you get about 300 data points for marinas as well. So when you're doing your planning, look at waterwayguide.com, which is an online service as well. We talked about anchorages a moment ago, Bob. These are some of your favorite anchorages. Did you find them to be the same and in the same condition this year, northbound, as you have in years past?
Yeah, no problem. The one thing I look for in an anchorage is access to shore, because I have a dog. So all these are the ones that are spaced, if you're going south or north, and you have access to shore to have dog relief. The only thing you look out for is Marine Stadium, Miami, when they have a boat show. Normally on the way south, that may be full when you can't actually get into it. On the way north, they're usually not a problem. But otherwise,
right.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Well, waterwayguide.com with the Waterway Explorer also lists anchorages as well. You just have to find the symbol with the anchor. You touch it, and it'll give you details. And each of the anchorages have been rated by folks who've been there. Lots of comments, etc. All right. Well, navigation. Here's an important component, whether it's today or whether it's next year or whether it's 10 years ago. Navigation on the Intracoastal Waterway is an important component, as it is anywhere. And since Bob is the expert at this and has really distinguished himself as one of the leading navigators, leading communicators, and reporters on the Intracoastal Waterway, I'm going to let him take this one and walk us through from top to bottom each of these bullet points. Bob?
Yeah, the ICW looks deceptive in areas. Looks like you go, 150, 200, 400 feet either right or to the left. And what's apparent when you look at the chart is the way through for deep water is very narrow in many places. You got to pay attention to the charts and the waterway guide alerts for that area. It's possible to choose your tide so you can transit to the extent of going at a layover point. For example, you may want to go to Myrtle Beach and spend 2 or 3 days or 4 days there. So when you go down south through the shallows of Georgia, you're hitting it, all the shallows at high water. That way you don't even worry about all the alerts. You actually go over areas that are dry at low tide with 8 feet. There's lots of room there. And that's important to do that. Pay attention where you are in the water. We always go south and periodically we take our grandkids. The grandkids do video games. The grandkids want to look at the chart when they're with us at the helm, and they want to drive the little arrow right on that line that says where they should go. And we said, no, look ahead. That's only a reference. It's not a video game to drive it on the ICW. And some people starting right out might start doing that. But the tides and the effect of the wind, if we have a wind off the East Coast, it pushes water in up to 1 foot to 2 feet, more than normal. If you have a west wind, you get just the opposite. So you may go through and see what the tide is on a tide chart and find out where did all the water go? Well, there was a west wind for the last 2 days of 25 knots. It blew the water out. So be aware of that as a possibility. If you have EIS, very useful at a place like the rock pile by Myrtle Beach. Look ahead to find out if there's a big barge coming at you. There's no room in the rock pile for a barge to pass and you have to go the other direction. Unless you can back up really well, you should got to look ahead and call ahead on the VHF. And lastly, VHF, when you get to a bridge, make sure you call the bridge operator and tell him you want to go through. Even if you're number 7 in line, he's got to know that you want to go through. There have been bridges that have closed on top of a boat because the boat did not identify himself to the bridge operator. He was coming through and the bridge operator couldn't see him. That's happened at least 3 or 4 times that I know of personally.
Well, I can tell you from my time in Florida, where there are a lot of bridges, it's really important to announce, to your point, even if there's 6 or 7 boats, 8 boats in front of you. I'm vessel number 8 or 9 in line, or I'm on the 25-foot whatever, or I'm on the 35-foot pursuit. I want to let you know we're planning to go through. Communicate to the bridge operators. They want to know it. Communicate to each other. Learn how to use the VHF. Know what the operating channel is for your area. Along the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway, channel 13 is the preferred channel. 16 is the Coast Guard hailing channel. If they have 2 radios, have a handheld, have one on 13 for low power, 16 if you need to make the calls. But learn the protocol on the radio. It helps an awful lot. Your cell phone's not going to always work. A lot of bridge operators won't answer the cell phone. Would you agree with that, Bob?
No, as a matter of fact, they mostly don't. And there's 2 channels for bridges. Channel 13 in North Carolina, and channel 9 further south in Florida,
right,
and those southern companies.
All right, let's talk about charts, chart plotters, mobile apps. We've touched on it briefly, but it's real simple, and I'll cover this one, Bob. It's real simple at this point. Many vessels today still believe in paper charts, and that's your own choice. But you can still get them. You can print them yourself out of NOAA sources, or find chart books online that are sale. Purchase them already pre-printed. If you are a chart plotter person, you see that photograph. That's a picture of my helm. I have a chart plotter on the helm with Navionics chipset in the chart. I have mobile apps that I run on my different devices. I have binoculars at the helm. I have waterway guides with advice that has local knowledge. Obviously, I have a compass and I have a VHF radio. And in my opinion, I don't care if you're in a 23-foot boat or a 230-foot boat, those are necessary when you are navigating any stretch of the waterways out there. It's multiple resources, and it gives you definite security to cross-reference and cross-resource where you are and what you're doing. Here are some precaution areas. Again, Bob 423 is well known for documenting, creating routes. We could do an entire hour on just the data that Bob has collected, distributed, and recommended and overlaid on various manifestations in the Waterway Guide navigation alerts and in other areas. Everything from his own tracks that you can download, GPX tracks that will go right into your chart plotter or into your app, to publishing these in printed format. But these are some of the precaution areas, and if you would, Bob, walk us through why these are precaution today on the Atlantic ICW in 2020 and what you've done with this particular chart on the right side here.
Yeah, going down the list, Great Dismal Swamp, sometimes the swamp is closed for various reasons. Limbs come down, there's great wind may blow over a tree, so call ahead to make sure it's open. Elmore Sound and Neuse River, you don't go in winds above 15 knots. The sounds are shallow, and it can become dangerous between 15 and 20. Would not be advised. On the thing on the right, we're talking about Jupiter Inlet. This is the most shallow area on the ICW line right now. It is down to 3.4 feet, even if you honor R2. And it's not been dredged yet. The buoy has not been moved. And you see various ways of going through that passage and what the mean low water is. And what's recommended is a dotted line for 8 feet of the mean low water. And you got to pay attention to that and know about it. And it's listed in a Waterway Guide alert for that area. If you look at the other ones in New River Inlet, Lockwood Folly, Shallow, you can all get through with 8 feet, 7, 8 feet of water. You just have to know what the path is. Either follow the Bob 423 track or read the Waterway Guide alert for the area, and you'll find your way through.
I want to make one observation on this. What we're looking at here is a United States Army Corps of Engineers survey and the color scheme that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers uses to publish its surveys. Those surveys are published inside Waterway Guide navigation alerts as overlays on charts that are NOAA-based charts. And that color scheme is a new one for a lot of folks. Bob and I have had long discussions about this, but this is the accepted color reference point for the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, I've got a question for you, Bob. That dotted line that you have running from left to right, going around the shallow areas, did you do that one time, or did you back up and run around a bunch of times to finally figure out how to get around it?
Well, no, I did it one time. The reason being that I had that chart in front of me. So all I did was follow the green water, which is deep, around that bright red, which is very shallow.
Gotcha. Regardless of what the aids to navigation say in front of you, is that right?
That's exactly right.
So there was a lag between the time that these Army Corps of Engineers surveys are conducted, published, and the Coast Guard either gets out or not and moves the aids to navigation.
Well, let me give you 2 examples. An example of Jupiter Inlet, it's been 6 months, and they have not moved the navigation area, navigation buoy. Example number 2 is right north of Beaufort, North Carolina. And in fact, they did a survey, and the buoy was moved not more than 2 or 3 days later. So it depends upon the Coast Guard area, how fast they respond to a survey.
I'll be darned. Interesting. Well, here's, I think I jumped, let me see, did we, may have changed out something, but here is Little Mud River, Georgia from a Navionics chart. So walk us through this one if you would.
Yeah, what you see there is a yellow line which shows my track through that area. And if you see down by where the tide station's at, there's light blue, which indicates the shallows, that you have to go around. The recommended line from NOAA goes right across that shallows. By looking at the Navionics chart, you know you got to go outside that area and stay in that white deep area. Likewise, down at the bottom, right above where it says route, there's another blue area, and that white area is kind of narrow. If you look at the Navionics, you can zero in on it and thread the needle and maintain deep water without going to ground.
Good show. Good. Okay, so these are some of the precaution areas this year following dredging. I was going to show what a waterway guide precaution area Nav Alert Overlay looks like in the waterwayguide.com. Each of those triangles with the exclamation point represents what we call a Nav Alert that we have posted. We put them on, we take them off, we update them, and they're throughout all of the waterwayguide.com environment. We also serve this data up to various other chart plotters. And if you want to find out the details, you just click on one, it opens, and it takes you through the information. And this is what it looks like with the satellite overlay. This happens to show a full listing that was done with particular navigation alerts and location here as well. So they're available, and if you're going to go through some of these areas or any stretch of water, it behooves you to log on and take a look at that data and content. And then, of course, we've got the latest from Navionics. Jessica?
Yes, Navionics has come out with some really cool updates. They have released relief shading and sonar chart shading, which are these different layers, colored layers that you see here. It helps to navigate, especially shallower areas. And of note, if you do have the Navionics app, you do not have to have Wi-Fi or cell signal for it to follow you. You do, however, have to ensure that you've downloaded the app and updated your charts before you leave cell or Wi-Fi reception. So make sure you've updated your chart and in your chip as well to get the latest updates from your Navionics chart.
Indeed, great advice, and it's a great technology. It is indeed. So some of the solutions to precaution areas. First of all, it's not a problem. As Bob has said, if you go at low tide, there's additional areas you want to be aware of. If you can go through most of all of these stretches on a half full rising tide, a little bit of research, don't be afraid, just be aware. So most of the concerns can be avoided by choosing to pass through at the right time. Go to the alert list, get your apps uploaded, make sure that they're updated. And if you have the right kind of vessel and you want to go offshore, go on offshore in the right kind of weather and bypass the shallow areas entirely if your vessel will accommodate it. So that's essentially the big review for the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway in August of 2020. Regardless of where you are on the AICW, take your time. Don't be in a hurry. Remain flexible because it's pretty simple. If you're not flexible when it comes to boating, you're going to end up pushing yourself perhaps beyond your limits or trying to arrive somewhere when you shouldn't be. Here's some great advice, Bob. Explain bullet point number 3.
Yeah, what we're talking about is a golden rule of sailing. If you're going to meet somebody, always you can commit to a place or a time, but you cannot commit to both. Something is going to keep you from doing that. So if you're going to meet somebody, say, "Well, I'll meet you in in Charleston," but don't say, "I'll meet you in Charleston on Tuesday." That's a no-no. Or say, "I'll meet you on Sunday, but I'll tell you where I'm going to be." That's a golden rule of sailing with friends.
Yeah, because weather always changes, vessels have problems, any number of things happen. Cell phones do work in most areas, but get an unlimited data plan. Where are the problem areas for cell phone coverage still today, Bob?
Yeah, the problem that most cell phone plans have a problem with is Alligator River and Alligator Pungo Canal. Other than that area, it's pretty much functional down the entire ICW. And the unlimited plan is great. We have our cell phone plugged in with an adapter that plugs right into the HD DVI input on the TV, and we stream every night. Verizon does not throttle the plan if a cell phone tower is not busy. If you use hotspot, they will throttle it, but not if you take it right off the iPhone.
Good advice. Good advice. Yeah, the unlimited data plan. Things are getting better all along the Intracoastal Waterway. As you mentioned, that real desolate stretch where oftentimes a black bear is swimming across the canal in front of you. I've seen that a couple of times on the Alligator Pungo. That's a pretty great sight. Marinas and anchorages are more crowded in the spring and fall as the annual migrations of boats go north and south. Plan accordingly. There may be a little difference now. I believe, and Jessica, I think Garmin and Navionics have seen this, as have we, that there are a few more boaters out there now as a result of some of the stay-at-home requirements. Folks are rediscovering boating, so it may be a little more crowded. You may have a little more difficult time getting into marinas. Plan out as far in advance as you can by contacting the marinas and the facilities where you want to stay, and always have a backup plan, whether it's an anchorage or another facility waiting for you. And then, of course, we're in the midst. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
No, just one point. During this period of time, during the migration, I usually plan on about 3 days in advance relative to getting a reservation. They can always cancel if I don't make it. Trying to get a reservations very next day, I've been unsuccessful several times. So I go about 3 days in advance.
You have favorite marinas. Are they requiring payment in advance, 3 days in advance, or they just put you on the reservation list?
No, I just make a reservation. I never pay in advance.
Yeah, some marinas are starting to go to that, and that's just a heads up for our boaters out there. Be aware. Some boaters are pushing back on that, but I'll let you deal with that on a case-by-case basis. And hurricane season certainly requires vigilance, protecting you and your vessel. And we know that things are changing all the time in that regard, so just pay attention in terms of tips. Well, here's the resources. If you are getting ready to go out for a day, a weekend, a month, or a lifetime, these are some of the things you have to get. You've got to get that electronic nautical chart through your chart plotter. You've got to get the mobile app. Certainly, we recommend Navionics and the great work that they're doing. There's some other mobile navigation apps out there that can serve as adjuncts or add on to that. Get your weather apps, know how to read the weather. Get your waterway guides for where you're going to be. That printed page is indispensable. Bob's 2020 ICW Cruising Guide has some great advice and other stuff that we don't include in Waterway Guide because he's a specialist on navigation alerts in the cruising guide. NOAA weather, understand how to read it. And then there's an ICW Facebook page that Bob started last year that's just on fire. So there's lots of advice, other folks out there, crowdsourcing, people who have been there, people who have done it. So you can't go wrong with this group of resources between the Waterway Guide and ICW and apps, Sonar Chart, Navionics. You're covered. And here's some other details. We have a skipper's handbook in our Waterway Guide that gives you some other details and other information as well. So that's pretty much wraps up our overview of the ICW. Bob, do you have any parting wisdom or parting advice for anyone who may be headed out this year?
Yes, number one, don't put it off. You know, you never know what tomorrow is going to bring. If you say, well, I'll do it in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you're making a big mistake. Do it when you can.
That is great advice. What an adventure. It's always good to be on with you. Jessica, any final words of advice from Navionics and our friends at Garmin? And you can just take it here and close it down. And we really appreciate you asking us to be on and participate in this great opportunity to present the beauty and of safe boating, travel, and adventure on America's waterways.
Yes, thank you so much, Bob and Ed, for joining me today. Such great information and so useful to everyone that's going out now, especially as we are enjoying our waterways more and more in these unprecedented times. So happy to have you both join us. And thanks to Navionics, the Garmin company, and to Waterway Guide for hosting this webinar. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.